I didn't wake up on a Tuesday morning intending to become a legally protected, slithering warlord. Honestly, I really didn't. I just wanted to drink my black coffee, survive the brutal, oppressive humidity of Cary, North Carolina, and pay my mortgage in peace. I bought my house in the Whispering Pines subdivision because it was quiet, the property values were stable, and it was close to my favorite hardware store. I knew it had a homeowners association, but I figured as long as I didn't paint my garage door neon purple or park a rusted-out tractor in the driveway, I'd be fine. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Cary, North Carolina, for those who have never had the distinct pleasure of visiting during a summer drought, is one of those highly manicured, aggressively affluent suburbs where the grass is legally required to be exactly 2.5 inches tall. Not 2.4, not 2.6. If a blade of Kentucky bluegrass dares to reach for the sun in a way that doesn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic, a retired accountant in a golf cart will materialize out of thin air to issue you a citation. That retired accountant, in my case, was Brenda. It was mid-July, and the sky hadn't spit out a single drop of rain in 42 days. The heat index was pushing 110 degrees by noon every single day. The local government had issued severe drought warnings, mandating that citizens drastically cut back on water usage. No washing cars, no filling pools, and definitely no running sprinklers for 3 hours a day just to keep your ornamental hedges looking perky. Being a law-abiding citizen who actually cares about not draining the municipal water supply dry, I turned off my sprinkler system. I let nature take its course. And nature's course, as it turns out, was to absolutely nuke my front lawn from orbit. It didn't just die, it gave up the ghost and turned into a crispy, yellow-brown wasteland that crunched under your shoes like a pile of stale potato chips. It looked like the surface of Mars, if Mars was located in a suburban cul-de-sac. I didn't love it, but I figured, hey, everyone else's lawn is looking a little thirsty too, right? We're all in this environmental crisis together. I walked out my front door on a Tuesday to grab the mail, sweating through my gray t-shirt in 3 seconds flat. And that's when I saw it. Plastered right in the dead center of my front door, taped with industrial-strength clear packing tape so that peeling it off would inevitably take a chunk of the exterior paint with it, was a neon pink piece of paper. I stared at it. I blinked the sweat out of my eyes. It was a citation. A $500 citation from the Whispering Pines HOA. Violation of community aesthetic standards, it read in bold, aggressive font. Failure to maintain a flourishing landscape. Fine, $500. Immediate remediation required. I ripped the paper off the door, taking a dime-sized flake of white paint with it, just as I predicted, and let out a heavy sigh. As I stood there holding the pink slip of doom, I heard the distinct, rhythmic squeaking of a golf cart approaching. I didn't even have to look up. I knew that squeak. It was the chariot of the HOA president herself. Brenda pulled up to the edge of my driveway and threw the golf cart into park. She was wearing a pristine white tennis visor, khaki shorts that were ironed to a razor-sharp crease, and a polo shirt the exact shade of seafoam green. She carried a clipboard like a shield. She didn't play tennis. She just liked the aesthetic of a woman who might, at any moment, order you to get off her court. "Morning," Brenda chirped, her voice dripping with the kind of artificial sweetness that instantly rots your teeth. "Brenda," I said, walking down the driveway, waving the neon pink paper in the air. "What exactly is this?" "It's a citation for your yard," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "I drove by yesterday and, well, it's just an absolute eyesore. It's bringing down the property values of the entire cul-de-sac. The board has received multiple complaints. Brenda, there are exactly 3 houses in this cul-de-sac. Me, you, and the Hendersons. The Hendersons are in Florida for the summer. Are you telling me you complained to yourself about my lawn, held a board meeting with yourself, and then fined me $500? Her smile tightened. "The board acts on behalf of all residents, present or not. Your lawn is dead. It is a violation of the bylaws." "It's a drought," I argued, gesturing to the cloudless, blazing sky. The county literally issued a mandatory water conservation order last week. We aren't supposed to be watering our lawns. If I turn my sprinklers on, I get fined by the city water department. Brenda let out a short, breathy laugh, as if I had just told a very quaint, very stupid joke. She reached into the basket of her golf cart and pulled out a massive leather-bound binder. It had to be 400 pages thick. It was the Whispering Pines HOA bylaws, a document rumored to be longer and significantly more complicated than the United States Constitution. The county guidelines are suggestions for civic responsibility, Brenda stated, flipping through the heavy pages with practiced efficiency. The HOA bylaws are binding contractual obligations that you agreed to when you purchased the property. Let me direct your attention to Section 4, subsection B. She spun the binder around and shoved it toward my chest. I grabbed it to keep it from hitting me. "Read it aloud, please," she insisted, crossing her arms. I looked down at the highlighted text. I took a deep breath. Yards must be flourishing, natural environments that enhance the neighborhood ecosystem and maintain the pristine aesthetic of the Whispering Pines community. "Exactly," Brenda said, snatching the binder back. "A flourishing, natural environment. Look at your dirt patch. Does that look flourishing to you? Does that enhance the ecosystem? No. It looks like a sandbox. Brenda, the grass is dead because the natural environment right now is an oven. If I plant grass seed today, it will bake into bread by noon. It's physically impossible to have a flourishing green lawn right now without breaking city law." "I don't make the rules, I just enforce them," she said, using the battle cry of middle management everywhere. "You have 30 days. 30 days to do what? Make it rain?" 30 days to bring your property into compliance, Brenda replied, her tone dropping the artificial sweetness and becoming pure ice. "If you do not have a flourishing natural environment established in 30 days, the HOA will enact the remediation clause. We will hire my brother-in-law's landscaping company, Greenscapes by Gary, to come in, tear out this dirt, and lay down fresh sod." I stared at her. "Gary charges like 10 grand for a full yard sod installation. And that $10,000 will be billed directly to you." Brenda smiled. "If you refuse to pay it, we will place a lien on your house. It's all in the bylaws. Section 6, subsection A. You have a good day now. Try to stay hydrated." She threw the golf cart into drive, the tires squeaking in protest, and rolled away toward her own house. A house that, I noted with intense irritation, had a lawn that looked like a lush, emerald green golf course. She was definitely watering it at 3 in the morning when the city inspectors were asleep. I stood in my driveway, the oppressive Carolina heat baking my shoulders, holding a $500 fine and staring down the barrel of a $10,000 landscaping bill and a potential lien on my home. My blood was boiling, and it wasn't just the humidity. It was the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it all. The absolute power trip of a woman who wielded a binder like a broadsword. I walked back inside, locked the door, and threw the pink slip onto my kitchen island. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, ignoring the fact that it was 100 degrees outside, and sat down at my laptop. I am a reasonable man. I don't like conflict. But if there is one thing that I absolutely refuse to tolerate, it is being bullied by a homeowners association. They thrive on the assumption that you will just roll over, pay the fine, and comply because fighting them is too expensive and too exhausting. They bank on your submission. I opened up a search engine. I typed in North Carolina landscaping laws. I scrolled past the basic city ordinances. I kept digging. Brenda had used very specific words. She had highlighted them in her binder. She had made me read them out loud. A flourishing natural environment that enhances the neighborhood ecosystem. She wanted nature. She wanted an ecosystem. I spent the next 4 hours going down a legal rabbit hole that took me from local zoning ordinances to state property rights, and eventually to the holy grail of malicious compliance. I found myself staring at the official website for the National Wildlife Federation, specifically their Certified Wildlife Habitat Program. According to the NWF, any individual can turn their private property into an officially recognized, federally registered wildlife habitat. To do so, you don't need a perfectly manicured lawn. In fact, manicured lawns are discouraged. What you need are 4 specific elements to support local wildlife: food, water, cover, and places to raise young. If you provide those 4 things, using native plants and natural structures, you can apply for certification. Once certified, your yard is officially recognized as a sanctuary. But that wasn't the best part. The absolute, mind-blowing loophole came when I cross-referenced the NWF certification with North Carolina general statutes on native wildlife protection. Under state law, once a property is officially registered as a habitat and begins harboring native species, any attempt by a third party, including a homeowners association, to forcefully alter that habitat, destroy the natural cover, or harass the wildlife constitutes a direct violation of state environmental protections. State law always, unequivocally, supersedes HOA bylaws. If I planted grass, it would die. If Gary the landscaper laid sod, I would owe $10,000. But if I gave Brenda exactly what her rulebook demanded, a flourishing, natural ecosystem, and legally certified it, there wouldn't be a single thing she or her brother-in-law could do about it. I looked out my front window at the barren, crispy dirt. It didn't look like a yard anymore. It looked like a blank canvas. I smiled, pulled out my credit card, and started making phone calls. Brenda wanted nature. I was going to give her a jungle. The first step was finding a contractor who was willing to commit career suicide in the eyes of a manicured suburban HOA. I mean, I called 3 normal landscaping companies first, and they literally all hung up on me the second I said the words intentionally unkempt and decomposing wood. One guy even asked if I was Gary's competition trying to prank him. So I had to dig deeper. I went to the darkest, crunchiest corners of the local community message boards and found an ad for EcoEd's Earth Healing and Permaculture Solutions. The ad didn't have a website, just a Yahoo email address, and a grainy photo of a guy who looked like he had strong opinions on kombucha. I knew instantly he was the one. I called Ed, and he agreed to come over that same afternoon for a consultation. He rolled up to my house in a 1998 Subaru Outback that was quite literally held together by bumper stickers and rusted dreams. The exhaust gave a pathetic little sputter before dying completely. Ed stepped out, entirely barefoot on the scorching asphalt, wearing cargo shorts that had seen better decades and a faded t-shirt that said, "Make dirt, not war." The guy smelled intensely of patchouli, damp earth, and, I guess, spiritual superiority. "Brother," Ed said, walking up my driveway with his arms outstretched like he was greeting an old friend instead of a guy paying him for an estimate. He stopped at the edge of my dead lawn, dropped to his knees, and actually ran his hands through the crispy, dead Kentucky bluegrass. He scooped up a handful of dirt, brought it to his nose, and inhaled deeply. "This soil. She is weeping, man. She's been suffocated by the suburban paradigm, stripped of her natural chaotic energy. Yeah, well, the HOA is threatening to forcefully suffocate her with $10,000 worth of Gary's premium sod if I don't fix it," I said, leaning against my mailbox. "Ed, honestly, I need a massive favor. I need this yard to technically legally qualify as a certified wildlife habitat, like, by the book, federal standards. But visually, I need it to be an absolute, unmitigated nightmare for a woman named Brenda." Ed slowly stood up, dusting his hands on his shorts. He looked at me, his eyes wide and glassy underneath a mop of unwashed hair. A slow, knowing smile crept across his face. "You want to disrupt the monoculture?" Ed whispered, nodding slowly as if I had just revealed the secrets of the universe to him. "You want to invite the wild back in to spite the system?" "Literally, yes. That is exactly what I want. Can you do it?" Ed crossed his arms. "To get the National Wildlife Federation certification, we have to appease the 4 pillars of the wild, man. Food, water, cover, and a sacred space for the creatures to raise their young. He stroked his chin, looking over my barren front yard like a general surveying a battlefield. "Say no more, brother. We bring the logs." And honestly, when Ed said he was bringing the logs, I severely underestimated what that meant. The next morning, at exactly 6:15, the peace and quiet of the Whispering Pines subdivision was violently shattered by the roaring diesel engine of a massive, commercial dump truck backing into my driveway. The backup alarm was echoing off the identical brick facades of the neighborhood. I walked out holding my coffee just in time to see Ed, hanging out the passenger side window, throwing up a peace sign. The truck bed tilted upward, and with a thunderous, earth-shaking crash, 3 actual tons of decomposing, moss-covered, wildly asymmetrical oak logs avalanched onto the exact center of my front yard. A massive cloud of dirt and bark dust billowed into the humid morning air. It looked like a logging truck had crashed and just abandoned its cargo right on my property line. "Cover in nursery spaces, brother," Ed yelled over the sound of the engine, hopping out of the truck. He was wearing steel-toed boots today, which I guess was his version of formal wear. "Insects will colonize the decaying matter, providing food for the amphibians, and the cavities in the wood will offer absolute sanctuary for the mothers of the earth to lay their eggs." "It looks horrible, Ed," I said, grinning from ear to ear. "It's perfect." For the next 8 hours, Ed and a crew of 2 other guys who looked exactly like him turned my yard into a meticulously calculated ecological disaster zone. They dug a jagged, asymmetrical hole right near the sidewalk and dropped in a black plastic preformed pond liner. But they didn't fill it with chlorinated water or put a cute little spitting frog fountain in it. Oh no. Ed filled it with water from a rain barrel, dumped in a bucket of actual swamp muck he had brought in his Subaru, and tossed in some floating duckweed. "The vernal pool," Ed announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Water source. Crucial for the habitat. In 3 days, this bad boy is going to be teeming with mosquito larvae, which will bring the dragonflies, which will bring the frogs. The cycle of life, man." Next came the planting. To satisfy the food requirement of the NWF, Ed didn't plant neat rows of petunias or cute little azalea bushes. He planted native North Carolina milkweed, wild blackberry brambles, and something called Joe Pie weed, which basically just looked like a towering, aggressive weed that belonged on the side of a highway. He planted them haphazardly around the log pile and the swamp puddle, ensuring there was absolutely zero symmetry or aesthetic cohesion. He threw down a thick, heavy layer of raw, undyed pine mulch over the remaining dirt, which smelled aggressively like a forest floor. By sunset, my yard looked like a piece of untamed wilderness had been aggressively teleported into the middle of a high-end subdivision. It was chaotic, overgrown, slightly smelly, and legally absolutely flawless. I paid Ed his invoice, which was literally $800, a fraction of Gary's sod quote, and waved goodbye as his Subaru sputtered away down the street. I immediately went inside, cracked open my laptop, and got to work on the bureaucracy. I went to the National Wildlife Federation website and filled out the application. I checked the boxes with extreme prejudice. Food source? Yes, aggressive native brambles. Water source? Yes, a stagnant swamp pit. Cover? Yes, 3 tons of rotting oak. Places to raise young? Yes, the decaying cavities of the aforementioned oak. I paid the $20 processing fee and eagerly checked the box to purchase the official embossed metal yard sign. Then, just to make sure my bases were completely covered with titanium plating, I sent an email to the local county extension office of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, formally registering my address as a native pollinator and amphibian sanctuary. I printed out every single receipt, confirmation email, and legal statute I could find, slipped them into a bright red folder, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. It was Thursday afternoon. The heat was still oppressive, and my new swamp puddle was already starting to look nicely murky. I was sitting on my front porch, drinking an iced tea, when I heard the squeak. Brenda's golf cart came careening around the corner of the cul-de-sac. I mean, she was pushing that electric motor to its absolute limits. She slammed on the brakes right in front of my house, the tires actually skidding a few inches on the pavement. She just sat there for a solid 30 seconds, her mouth hanging open, staring at the sheer volume of rotting wood sitting where a lawn used to be. The color drained from her face, and then, very rapidly, a deep, furious shade of crimson crept up her neck and settled in her cheeks. She grabbed her clipboard and practically leapt out of the cart. "What in the name of God is this?" Brenda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the logs. "What have you done to your property?" "Hey, Brenda," I said casually, taking a slow sip of my iced tea. "Just complying with the 30-day remediation notice you gave me." "Complying?" She marched up my driveway, her sensible tennis shoes smacking against the concrete. "This is a dump. You have turned your yard into a literal landfill. There is a pile of garbage wood, weeds everywhere, and is that a mud puddle?" "It's a vernal pool," I corrected her gently. "For the amphibians. I don't care if it's the Bellagio fountain. You are out of your mind if you think the HOA is going to allow this." Brenda was actually shaking, clutching her binder to her chest. "This is the most egregious violation of the aesthetic guidelines I have ever seen. I am calling Gary right now. He is coming tomorrow with a backhoe, and we are billing you for the removal of all this. This trash." I stood up from my chair, walked to the edge of the porch, and leaned against the railing. I made sure to maintain a perfectly calm, customer service level smile. "Brenda, do you remember our conversation on Tuesday?" I asked. "You were very specific. You even made me read the bylaws out loud. Section 4, subsection B, right?" "I know what the bylaws say," she snapped. "Then you know they require the yard to be a flourishing, natural environment that enhances the neighborhood ecosystem," I quoted, hitting the words hard. "And honestly, Brenda, I couldn't agree with you more. Gary's sod isn't a natural environment. It's a sterile, water-hungry monoculture. This?" I gestured broadly to the towering pile of rotting wood and the jagged briar bushes. "This is a flourishing natural ecosystem. I used exclusively native North Carolina species. It provides food, water, and shelter for local wildlife. It is exactly what the rulebook demands." "It looks like a swamp!" she screamed, dropping the professional facade entirely. "It is an eyesore. I am fining you $1,000 for unauthorized structural modifications, and if those logs aren't gone by Friday, the board will foreclose on this house." She spun around, stomped back to her golf cart, and peeled out, nearly clipping the curb as she sped back toward her house. I just stood there, smiling into the heavy summer heat. Let her write the fines. Let her threaten the backhoe. Because my official metal NWF plaque was currently in the mail, and once that sign went into the ground, this little suburban dispute was going to escalate into a federal wildlife protection incident. And honestly, I couldn't wait. Honestly, it didn't even take a full week for the ecosystem to start doing exactly what ecosystems do. I mean, Ed's chaotic permaculture setup worked almost too well. The vernal pool I had in the front yard was suddenly home to, a frankly alarming number of spring peeper frogs. By day 5, the sun would go down, and my front yard would erupt into a deafening chorus of amphibian romance. It literally sounded like a rainforest soundtrack was being blasted through concert speakers on my lawn. And where there is water and heavy, rotting wood cover, there are rodents. Field mice started migrating from the nearby woods into my sanctuary, taking up residence in the deep, shaded crevices of the oak logs. I was sitting on my porch one morning, drinking my coffee, and I literally watched 3 little brown mice scurrying along the edge of the mulch bed, completely thriving. And of course, Brenda noticed. I guess she must have been doing night patrols or something, because on Monday morning, I found another citation taped to my door. This one wasn't neon pink. It was aggressively bright yellow. Violation, vermin attraction, and nuisance noise, the ticket read. Property has become a breeding ground for pests. Fine, $750. Immediate extermination required. I just laughed. I literally laughed out loud, holding the paper in my hand. Brenda was playing checkers, and I was playing three-dimensional, legally protected chess. She thought I was just some lazy homeowner who didn't want to mow. She had no idea I was building a fortress, because that exact same afternoon, the mail carrier pulled up to my house. He actually paused on the sidewalk, eyeing the massive log pile and the buzzing swarm of dragonflies over the puddle before gingerly stepping up to my porch to hand me a flat, heavy cardboard package. I took it inside, grabbed a box cutter, and sliced it open. There it was, the official National Wildlife Federation certified wildlife habitat plaque. It was cast aluminum, painted a deep forest green with raised gold lettering, featuring an incredibly smug-looking frog and a bird. It was beautiful. It was my shield. But a habitat isn't complete without its apex predators, right? If Brenda was complaining about mice, it was my civic duty to manage the pest population naturally. So I grabbed my keys and drove down to a highly specialized exotic pet and reptile supply store 2 towns over. I walked in, the air thick with humidity and the smell of cedar shavings, and walked straight up to the counter. The guy working there was named Todd. Todd had snake bites. The piercings, not actual bites, though honestly both seemed plausible, and a t-shirt that said cold-blooded. "Hey," I said, leaning on the glass counter, "I need to buy some snakes, like a lot of them." Todd looked up from his phone, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of setup do you have? You looking for a python? Boa? We got some nice ball pythons in the back." "No, I need native North Carolina snakes," I explained, pulling out my phone to show him my NWF certification and a picture of my yard. "I have a federally certified wildlife habitat. I've got a bit of a field mouse situation developing in my rotting oak logs, and I want to introduce some natural pest control. I need something entirely legal, native, non-venomous, and preferably something that looks absolutely terrifying to a 60-year-old woman in khaki shorts." Todd stared at the picture of my yard, then looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Dude, are you weaponizing reptiles against your HOA?" "I am asserting my state-protected environmental rights," I replied with a completely straight face. Todd actually gave me a high five. "I respect the hell out of that, honestly. You want eastern king snakes and black rat snakes. They're native, they thrive in log piles, they eat mice like popcorn, and they are completely harmless to humans. Plus, king snakes actually eat venomous snakes like copperheads, so you're basically doing the neighborhood a public service." "Perfect," I said. "How many can I legally buy right now?" An hour later, I drove back into the Whispering Pines subdivision with 2 heavy, secured plastic storage tubs in my back seat, containing 12 very healthy, very active native snakes. Some of the black rat snakes were literally 5 feet long. They looked like thick, shiny black garden hoses. I pulled into my driveway, unloaded the tubs, and carried them over to the log pile. I opened the lids and gently tipped the tubs onto their sides. It was honestly majestic watching them slither out. They immediately recognized the rotting wood as prime real estate and vanished into the deep, cool crevices of the oak logs. Once the residents were settled in, it was time for the finishing touches. I took a sturdy 4x4 wooden post, dug a hole right at the very edge of my property line where it met the sidewalk, and set the post in concrete. I screwed the beautiful green and gold NWF certification plaque right at eye level. Then, right below it, I attached a second sign. I had this one custom-made at a local print shop. It was bright, hazard warning yellow with bold black lettering. It read, "Caution. Federally registered and state-protected native snake habitat. Do not disturb the wildlife. Violators subject to state prosecution." I stepped back, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and admired my work. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. The reaction was instantaneous. I mean, it literally took less than 2 hours for the neighborhood group chat, a notoriously toxic WhatsApp group called Whispering Pines Watchdogs, to completely melt down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Brenda, HOA Press. Has anyone seen the absolute insanity at House 42? He has a sign warning about snakes. This is a public safety crisis. Susan, 74, owns 3 chihuahuas. I was walking little Barnaby on the sidewalk, and I swear I saw a giant black snake sunning itself on a rock. Barnaby was shaking for an hour. I will not have my fur baby eaten by a monster. Gary, landscaper, Brenda's brother-in-law. That yard is a code violation waiting to happen. I can have a crew out there tomorrow to clear that garbage out, Brenda. I smiled, typing out my response with slow, deliberate keystrokes. Me. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to clarify that my property is now an officially certified and registered National Wildlife Federation habitat. We are fostering a native, non-venomous population of eastern king snakes to naturally control the local rodent population, as encouraged by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. They are completely harmless to pets and humans. Please admire them from the sidewalk, and remember that state law prohibits the harassment of native wildlife on registered habitats. Have a flourishing day. The chat went dead silent for a solid 10 minutes. I could just picture Brenda sitting in her impeccably air-conditioned living room, her face turning purple, frantically flipping through her HOA binder, trying to find the word snake. Then an email popped up on my phone. It was directly from Brenda, bypassing the group chat entirely. Subject: Final warning. Extermination. This is your final notice. Your so-called habitat is a menace to the community and a direct violation of safety protocols. I have contacted a licensed exterminator. We will be at your property tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to gas the log pile and remove the reptiles. If you interfere, I will have the police present to ensure the safety of the contractors. You will be billed for the extermination and the subsequent removal of the logs. I read the email 3 times, letting the sheer arrogance of it wash over me. She was actually going to try and trespass on my property to kill state-protected wildlife. She was literally handing me the legal victory on a silver platter. I didn't even need to write a long response. I didn't need to argue. I hit reply and typed a single, simple sentence. Brenda, I strongly advise against interfering with state-protected wildlife on a registered sanctuary. I hit send, closed my laptop, and went to bed. I slept like a baby, lulled by the sound of 100 frogs singing in my front yard, dreaming about the absolute legal bloodbath that was going to happen at 9 o'clock the next morning. I didn't just want Brenda to retreat. I wanted her to surrender unconditionally. I wanted it documented, legally binding, and public. I went back inside, poured myself a fresh, giant mug of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen island. The air conditioning was humming, a stark contrast to the absolute swamp heat outside, and I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was pull up the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission website again. I mean, Officer Davis had given Brenda a stern verbal warning, but a verbal warning isn't on the public record. A formal complaint is. I found the specific portal for reporting wildlife harassment and habitat disturbance. I started typing. I didn't just summarize the morning. I transcribed it. I wrote out a detailed, play-by-play affidavit of exactly what had happened. I included the time she arrived, the exact name on Chuck's pest control van, the specific threats she made regarding chemical extermination of the eastern king snakes, and the fact that she had attempted to use local law enforcement to bypass state environmental statutes. I attached a time-stamped photo I had snapped through my living room window, showing her and Chuck standing aggressively on the edge of my property line, clearly pointing at the designated habitat area. I hit submit. Then I turned my attention to the HOA. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association held their monthly board meetings on the first Tuesday of every month at the community clubhouse. That was exactly 5 days away. I needed backup. I picked up my phone and called Ed. "Brother?" Ed answered on the second ring, sounding like he was standing in a wind tunnel. "Tell me the Earth is healing." "Ed, the Earth is literally thriving, and the establishment is terrified," I said, putting him on speakerphone while I started drafting an email. "The snakes are in the logs. Brenda tried to bring an exterminator this morning. The cops shut her down." Ed let out a long, wheezing laugh that sounded like a tractor trying to start. "Oh man, the paradigm shift is happening. The ecosystem always wins, brother. Always." "Did the authorities recognize the sovereign sanctity of the vernal pool?" "They recognized the state statutes, which is close enough," I replied. "Listen, there's an HOA board meeting this coming Tuesday. Brenda is 100% going to try and pass an emergency amendment to ban logs, or water features, or whatever she can think of to try and circumvent the NWF certification. I need to make sure my defense is completely bulletproof. Do you have the exact scientific names and ecological impact statements for everything we planted?" "I don't just have them, man. I live them," Ed said. "I can email you a full permaculture thesis on why that specific rotting oak is a keystone element for the local biomass. You want me to come to the meeting? I can bring my singing bowl." "Honestly, Ed, as much as I would absolutely love to see Brenda's face when you start playing a singing bowl at the community center, I think I need to play this one purely by the legal book. Just send me the plant data." "You got it, man. Keep fighting the concrete." I hung up and spent the next 3 hours preparing a dossier. I went completely overboard. I printed out 25 copies of the NWF certification guidelines. I printed 25 copies of the state laws regarding protected native reptiles. I printed 25 copies of my official harassment complaint filed with the State Wildlife Commission. I put them all in these incredibly obnoxious, bright green presentation folders. If I was going to a bureaucratic war, I was bringing the heavy artillery. The next few days in the neighborhood were incredibly tense. You could literally cut the passive aggression with a knife. People were avoiding the sidewalk in front of my house like it was radioactive. I saw Susan from across the street literally pick up her chihuahua, Barnaby, and carry him for a solid block just to ensure he didn't accidentally make eye contact with my yard. Meanwhile, my yard was having the time of its life. The Joe Pye weed had shot up another 6 inches, the milkweed was blooming, and the frog population was reaching symphonic levels. Every time I walked out to get the mail, I would see at least one snake lazily draped over the oak logs, just absolutely living its best life. They weren't bothering anyone. They were just doing snake things. Tuesday evening finally arrived. The Whispering Pines Community Clubhouse was a sterile, aggressively beige building that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent community pool and cheap commercial carpet cleaner. I walked in at 6:45 for a 7 o'clock meeting. I was wearing a crisp button-down shirt and carrying a heavy canvas bag filled with my bright green dossiers. The room was already packed. Usually these meetings have maybe 6 people who just want to complain about trash pickup times. Tonight, there were at least 40 people crammed into the folding chairs. Word had clearly spread. The Great Snake Standoff of House 42 was the biggest scandal to hit Whispering Pines since someone painted their mailbox slate gray instead of charcoal gray in 2019. I found a seat in the second row, right in the center. I sat down, placed my canvas bag on the floor, and crossed my arms. At exactly 7, Brenda marched up to the folding table at the front of the room. She was flanked by 2 other board members, a guy named Dave who always looked like he was asleep, and a woman named Carol who seemed to exclusively communicate in concerned sighs. But there was a 4th person at the table, a guy in a sharp, expensive-looking navy suit with a leather briefcase. He wasn't a resident. He had the exhausted, dead-behind-the-eyes look of a corporate attorney. Brenda slammed a wooden gavel down on the table. Literally, a wooden gavel. "I call this meeting of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association to order," she announced, glaring directly at me. We have a packed agenda tonight, but we are going to start with an emergency motion regarding severe aesthetic and safety violations in the community. A low murmur went through the crowd. Susan clutched her purse. I just smiled and gave Brenda a little wave. Over the past week, Brenda continued, her voice trembling with righteous indignation, one of our residents has intentionally created a public health hazard. He has dumped literal garbage on his lawn, allowed stagnant water to fester, and, most horrifyingly, intentionally introduced dangerous, aggressive reptiles into our community. They're non-venomous king snakes, Brenda, I called out casually, not standing up. They eat the mice? You do not have the floor, Brenda snapped, banging the gavel again. This board is tasked with maintaining the safety and property values of Whispering Pines. Therefore, I am introducing an emergency amendment to the bylaws. Section 4, subsection C will now state, no homeowner shall retain, cultivate, or store dead, decaying, or rotting wood of any kind on their property. Furthermore, the intentional breeding or harboring of any reptilian species, regardless of state classification, is strictly prohibited, and violators will face a daily fine of $100 until the hazard is removed. She looked incredibly smug. She looked like she had just checkmated me. I move to vote, Brenda said, turning to Dave and Carol. Hold on, I said, finally standing up. I picked up my canvas bag and started pulling out the bright green dossiers. I walked down the aisle, handing one to Susan, one to Gary the landscaper who was sitting in the back, and tossing one directly onto the board's folding table. What is this? Brenda demanded, refusing to touch the folder. That, Brenda, is a comprehensive legal summary of why everything you just said is completely unenforceable and legally actionable, I said, projecting my voice so the whole room could hear. Because, as I explained to you and Officer Davis, my yard is a federally certified and state-registered wildlife habitat. Your little internet certificate doesn't override the bylaws, she yelled. Actually, ma'am, it does. The voice didn't come from me. It came from the guy in the navy suit. The entire room went dead silent. Brenda whipped her head around to stare at him. Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell? Mr. Caldwell, the HOA's retained legal counsel, slowly opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a pair of reading glasses, and slipped them onto his face. He opened the green folder I had tossed on the table and briefly scanned the documents. Then, he looked at Brenda with an expression of profound pity. Miss Brenda, Caldwell said, his voice smooth and incredibly tired. When you called my office yesterday demanding I draft this amendment, you told me a resident was running an unauthorized reptile breeding business out of their garage. He is! They're in the logs, she sputtered. A registered permaculture habitat fostering native, non-venomous species for ecological balance is not a commercial breeding business, Caldwell clarified, holding up my state registration printout. I am looking at official documentation from the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. This property is protected under state environmental statutes. I don't care about state statutes. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. I care about the bylaws. We are a private community. Caldwell let out a sigh that rivaled Carol's. Brenda, private community guidelines cannot supersede state law. That is basic legal hierarchy. If you pass an amendment banning decaying wood, you are effectively mandating the destruction of a protected habitat. If you fine him for harboring those specific snakes, you are penalizing him for complying with a state-sponsored ecological program. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Furthermore, I see in this folder that the homeowner has filed a formal harassment complaint against you with the State Wildlife Commission for attempting to hire an exterminator to gas protected animals. Is this true? The color completely drained from Brenda's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. I was protecting the neighborhood. You were exposing the HOA to immense legal liability, Caldwell said sharply. If you had succeeded in killing those snakes, the state could have fined this HOA thousands of dollars. The homeowner could have sued us for property damage and emotional distress. This board has absolutely zero legal standing to enforce aesthetic guidelines on a property that is protected under environmental conservation laws. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. I mean, it was beautiful. It was a flawless, absolute victory playing out in real time. So, Caldwell continued, packing his papers back into his briefcase. My official legal advice to this board is to immediately withdraw the proposed amendment, formally rescind all outstanding citations against House 42, and frankly, issue a written apology so this homeowner doesn't decide to escalate that state complaint into a civil lawsuit. Brenda looked at Dave. Dave was staring intensely at the table. She looked at Carol. Carol let out a very long, very sad sigh and nodded at Caldwell. Brenda, I said, breaking the silence. I walked right up to the table and leaned on it. I don't want a lawsuit. I honestly just want to live in peace, but I need you to understand something. I didn't start this. You fined me $500 for a dead lawn during a drought. You demanded a flourishing natural environment. I just followed your rules to their absolute, logical, legally protected extreme. So, are we done here? Brenda's hands were shaking. She looked at the crowd. The crowd was staring back at her, and the mood had completely shifted. They weren't angry at me anymore. They were looking at Brenda like she was a massive liability who had almost gotten them sued. The fines... Brenda swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. The fines are rescinded. The amendment is withdrawn. Fantastic, I smiled. I turned around and walked back down the aisle. Have a great night, everyone. Drive safe. Watch out for the frogs. I walked out into the humid Carolina night, got in my car, and drove home. The aftermath was exactly as sweet as I imagined. A few days later, I got a piece of mail from the HOA. It was the official written notice that my fines had been completely cleared. But the absolute best part? A buddy of mine on the board, Dave, surprisingly, who turned out to be a pretty cool guy once he wasn't terrified of Brenda, told me that Caldwell had billed the HOA for his emergency attendance at the meeting and the legal review of the situation. The bill was exactly $1,500. The HOA had paid $1,500 just to be legally told they couldn't touch my log pile. As for the yard, it truly became an ecosystem. By late August, the milkweed was teeming with monarch butterflies. The frogs kept the mosquito population down to almost zero, which meant I was actually the only house on the block that could comfortably sit on the porch at dusk without getting eaten alive. And the snakes? They did exactly what Todd said they would do. They aggressively hunted the mice. We didn't have a single rodent issue in our garage all winter. And Brenda? Well, Brenda couldn't handle the defeat. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being the neighborhood enforcer, and I had completely shattered her authority in front of 40 people. She resigned from the HOA board a month later, citing health reasons and a lack of community support for maintaining standards. By the following spring, her house went up for sale. I watched Gary the landscaper come by one last time, not to lay sod, but to help her load up a moving truck. Word on the street was she bought a condo in a highly restricted, concrete-heavy complex closer to downtown Raleigh. A place with zero green space, zero lawns, and definitely zero snakes. Honestly, I couldn't be happier for her. So remember, folks, the system is designed to make you comply, to make you pay the fine and fall in line because fighting back seems too exhausting. But if they ask you to embrace nature, if they demand you follow the letter of their ridiculous laws, embrace it. Embrace it so hard it bites them right in their wallet.